I am 77 years old, and before you click away, I need you to hear this. If you are married, if you love someone, if there is a person sitting in the next room who thinks everything is fine between you, this might be the most important 5 minutes you listen to all year. 3 years ago, my husband James died from a stroke. It was sudden. He was sitting in his favorite chair watching the evening news, remote in his hand, slippers still on his feet. By the time the paramedics arrived, he was gone. But that is not the part that keeps me awake at night. What keeps me staring at the ceiling at 3 in the morning is something he said a week before he died. We were sitting on the porch after dinner. The sun was going down. It was quiet in that comfortable way that long marriages get. Out of nowhere, he looked at me and said, "Dorothy, I am still here. I have been here the whole time. I just wish you would let me back in." I did not argue. I did not cry. I did not ask what he meant. I stood up and told him I had dishes to wash. I left him sitting there alone. A week later, he was dead. For 48 years we were married. We raised 3 children. We built a life from nothing. We went from a 1-bedroom apartment in Detroit to owning our home free and clear. From the outside we looked solid, stable, the kind of couple people assume will make it to the end holding hands. And technically we did. But here is the truth nobody talks about. You can stay married for decades and still be emotionally gone. You can share a bed with someone and not let them touch your heart. I used to think marriages end because of big dramatic mistakes, affairs, abuse, someone walking out the door. That was not our story. Our story ended in silence. And if you stay with me, I am going to tell you exactly how I slowly, quietly destroyed a good man who was still trying to love me. Let me tell you how it really started. It did not begin with that porch conversation. It did not begin when he retired. It began in the early years, when we were young and tired and trying to survive. James worked 60 hours a week at the plant, sometimes more. Overtime was how we paid the bills. Overtime was how we moved out of that tiny apartment. Overtime was how we made sure our children had shoes that fit and food on the table. He was doing what he believed a good husband was supposed to do. But while he was working those long shifts, I was home raising 3 babies. I was packing lunches, helping with homework, cleaning, cooking, keeping track of doctor appointments, school plays, church events. I was exhausted in a different way. He missed recitals. He forgot anniversaries. There were evenings when he came home so tired he barely spoke before falling asleep on the couch. And I felt alone. Now hear me clearly. My pain was real. I am not rewriting history. There were nights I cried in the bathroom so the kids would not see. There were moments I wanted him to look at me and say, "I see how hard this is for you." But here is where I made my mistake. Instead of telling him how lonely I felt, I swallowed it. Instead of saying I need you here with me, I said nothing. Instead of fighting for connection, I chose silence. At first, it did not look like much. I simply stopped sharing certain thoughts. I stopped reaching for his hand first. I stopped asking him to sit and talk after the kids went to bed. When something hurt me, I told myself it was not worth bringing up. I convinced myself I was being strong, independent, self-sufficient. But what I was really doing was building a wall, brick by brick. There were no screaming matches, no dramatic confrontations. From the outside, we looked fine. We functioned. We handled responsibilities. We showed up to family gatherings together. Inside, though, I was slowly stepping back. Every missed moment became a piece of evidence. Every forgotten detail went into a mental file cabinet. I did not even realize I was keeping score at first. It just felt like self-protection. If I do not expect too much, I will not be disappointed. If I do not open up, I cannot be hurt. That is what I told myself. But unspoken hurt does not disappear. It hardens. It turns into quiet resentment. And resentment, if you let it sit long enough, becomes part of who you are. I began to see myself as the strong one, the one who did not need anything, the one who could carry it all without asking. What I did not understand back then is that strength without vulnerability creates distance. And distance, when left alone for years, can turn two people who love each other into strangers living under the same roof. That is how the wall was built. Not in one day, not in one fight, but in thousands of small moments where I chose silence over honesty and protection over closeness. That wall I told you about did not just sit there quietly. It changed the way I saw everything. Once you start protecting yourself instead of connecting, you begin to look for proof that you are right to do it. And I found that proof everywhere. He forgot our anniversary 1 year. I smiled and said it was fine. Inside, I added it to the list. He came home late and did not call. I told myself not to make a big deal out of it. Another mark on the board. I bought a new dress and wore it to church. He did not notice, or maybe he did and did not say it out loud. Either way, I wrote it down in my mind. He fell asleep halfway through a movie I had been excited to watch together. That one hurt more than it should have. I let it harden me a little more. None of these moments were catastrophic. None of them were cruel. But together, over time, they built a case. And without realizing it, I became a scorekeeper in my own marriage. If he disappointed me, I withdrew something small. He did not compliment me. I stopped complimenting him. He forgot to ask about my day. I stopped asking about his. He did not reach for my hand. I told myself I did not care if he ever did again. They were small punishments, quiet ones. So quiet he probably never even understood why the temperature in our house felt colder. I convinced myself I was just being careful. I told myself I was tired of giving more than I received. I said I was done being the only one who tried. But here is what keeping score really does. It turns love into a transaction. Every interaction becomes an exchange. Every kindness must be matched. Every mistake must be balanced. And when you start thinking that way, you stop seeing your partner as a person. You start seeing them as a ledger. The problem with a ledger is that someone is always in debt. And when a person feels like they are always behind, always failing, always one mistake away from another silent withdrawal, they stop feeling safe. James never yelled at me about the distance. He never accused me of being cold, but I could see it sometimes in his eyes, a confusion, a quiet question. What did I do wrong? The truth is, he was not competing against who he was that day. He was competing against a version of himself from 10 years earlier, a version I refused to forgive. While I was holding on to old disappointments, he was still showing up every day, trying in the ways he knew how, working, providing, being steady. Marriage is not a scoreboard. It is not about who failed more or who tried harder. It is about grace. And grace cannot survive in a courtroom where every mistake is stored as evidence. By the time I understood that, I had already spent years treating the man I loved like a defendant who could never quite prove he was enough. By the time I had turned our marriage into a quiet courtroom, something unexpected happened. James retired. For more than 3 decades, his identity had been tied to that plant. Early mornings, long shifts, overtime, providing. That was how he showed love. That was how he believed a man proved his worth. When retirement came, I expected him to be restless. I expected him to feel lost. Instead, something softened in him. The pressure was gone. The kids were grown. The house was quieter. And for the first time in years, he had time, real time. He started waking up before me just to make coffee, not because he had to rush out the door, but because he wanted to sit with me at the kitchen table. He would ask about my plans for the day and actually wait for the answer. After dinner, he would say, "Let us take a walk, just around the block." The same streets we had driven down for years but rarely walked together. When we watched television, he would reach for my hand, simple, gentle, no big speech attached to it. He began listening in a way I had asked for years earlier. And here is the part that still breaks my heart. I did not trust it. I told myself it was too late. I told myself I had waited decades for this version of him. I told myself I was done needing it. When he handed me coffee, I took it without saying thank you. When he suggested a walk, I said I was tired. When he reached for my hand, I pretended to adjust the blanket. I kept my answers short. I kept my tone neutral. I kept the walls standing. From his side, he was building a bridge. From mine, I was quietly removing the planks. What I did not understand then is that people can change when seasons change. The man who worked 60 hours a week was not the same man sitting across from me at the breakfast table. He had grown older, slower, more reflective. He was trying to come back, but I was still punishing the younger version of him. I had grown comfortable in disappointment. It felt safer than hope. If I allowed myself to believe he had changed, I would have to admit something even harder. I would have to admit that I still wanted him, that I still loved him, that the distance between us was not only his fault, and that would have required vulnerability. It is easier to stay guarded than to risk being hurt again. So while he was offering presents, I offered caution. While he extended warmth, I stayed measured. Looking back now, I see a man doing the best he knew how in each season of his life, first by providing, later by showing up emotionally. And I see a woman who could not recognize the shift because she was still looking at an old picture. If someone you love is trying to grow, do not trap them inside who they used to be, because sometimes the bridge back to each other is built quietly, and if you refuse to step onto it, it will not stay standing forever. It was during that season of change that James found something new to care about. After he retired, he started researching our family history. What began as curiosity turned into something deeper. He spent hours on ancestry websites. He mailed off a DNA test. He read books about West Africa, about the Ashanti region, about the transatlantic slave trade. He would sit at the kitchen table with maps spread out, tracing lines with his finger like he was following footsteps across time. There was a light in him I had not seen in years. One evening he told me he had traced his roots back 4 generations before slavery. He said the names out loud like they were sacred. He talked about Cape Coast Castle, about the door of no return, about standing where our ancestors once stood and honoring what they endured. It was not just a trip to him. It was healing. It was identity. It was coming full circle. For 2 years he talked about going. He said he wanted to walk through that door and then symbolically walk back out. As a free man returning home, he wanted to stand there and pray. He wanted to feel connected to something bigger than himself. And then one afternoon, he surprised me. He had booked it. 2 weeks in Ghana, flights, hotels, guided tours, everything planned. He laid the printed itinerary on the table in front of me. His hands were shaking, not from fear but from excitement. He looked like a young man again, hopeful and proud. He said, "I want us to do this together." And I said no. I did not yell. I did not mock his dream. I gave practical reasons. It is too far. It is too expensive. I do not want to sit on a plane that long. I am not sure it is safe. All reasonable concerns. All believable. None of them true. The truth was I was afraid. Afraid that if I went, I would see him cry. Afraid that if I stood next to him in a place that sacred, the wall inside me would crack. Afraid that sharing something that meaningful would pull me close to him again. Closeness requires softness. Softness requires risk. So I let him go alone. My husband flew halfway across the world to stand at the door of no return by himself. He sent me pictures of the ocean, the markets, the castle walls worn smooth by centuries of history. One photo showed him standing in that doorway, tears streaming down his face. I did not know what to say, so I said nothing. When he came home, something in him had shifted. He was quieter, not distant in anger, but distant in acceptance, as if a part of him had finally stopped knocking. I told myself we would talk about it later. I told myself we had time. 18 months later, he was gone. That trip was not just a vacation I declined. It was an open door I chose not to walk through. It was the last clear invitation he gave me to meet him in a place that mattered deeply. And I let that moment pass. Some opportunities in marriage do not announce themselves as final chances. They just feel like invitations. Until one day, you realize they were the last ones. After he passed, I spent a lot of time thinking about how marriages end. Most people imagine a dramatic collapse, an affair exposed, a suitcase packed, shouting matches that shake the walls, papers signed across a courtroom table. That is the kind of ending everyone can point to. But there is another kind, the quiet kind, the kind where two people stay in the same house, sleep in the same bed, sit at the same dinner table, post the same family photos, and yet something essential has slowly drained away. That was ours. There were no headlines in our story, no public scandal. If you had asked our neighbors, they would have said we were steady, faithful, dependable. And technically, we were. But emotional absence leaves no visible bruise. It leaves no broken furniture. It does not slam doors. It simply lowers the temperature 1 degree at a time. You stop sharing the small details of your day. You stop reaching across the couch. You stop asking deeper questions. Conversations become logistics. Who is picking up groceries? What time is the appointment? Did you pay the bill? You are present in body, but not in spirit. And the person on the other side can feel it. They knock gently at first. A question, a touch, a small attempt to connect. If the door does not open, they knock again. Over time, the knocking gets softer. Then it stops. When I read James' journal after the funeral, I saw it in his own words. He wrote that he felt like he was living with someone who was right there and yet unreachable. He said he was tired of knocking on a door that would not open. That sentence has never left me. I used to believe that as long as I stayed faithful and stayed home, I was doing my part. I thought showing up physically was enough. But you can sit across from someone every day and still make them feel alone. That is the danger of the quiet kind of destruction. It hides behind routine. It hides behind responsibility. It hides behind the idea that nothing is technically wrong. Meanwhile, warmth is slowly withdrawn, not in one dramatic act, but in tiny, almost invisible choices. You stop saying thank you. You stop saying I appreciate you. You stop saying I need you. The house still stands. The marriage certificate still exists, but the connection begins to starve. And when it finally ends, whether by death, divorce, or simple emotional surrender, it feels sudden. It was not sudden. It was gradual. I did not walk out on my husband. I did not betray him. I did not raise my voice. I simply became distant. And by the time I realized I had turned into a ghost inside my own marriage, the man who had been reaching for me was no longer there to reach back. That is why I say the quiet way can be more dangerous. Because no one warns you while it is happening. and by the time you see it clearly, you may already be standing alone in a house that still looks full. So now I sit in a quiet house with all the time in the world. There is a photograph on James' side of the bed. I have not moved it in 3 years. It is from our wedding day. He is smiling at me like I am the only woman alive. There is so much hope in his eyes, so much certainty. When I look at that picture now, I do not just see who we were. I see all the moments I assumed we would have later. That is the hardest lesson of all. We think time is generous. We think there will always be another conversation, another anniversary, another walk after dinner. We believe that if something feels unfinished, we will get the chance to finish it. But life does not promise that. I would give anything for one ordinary day with him. Not a vacation, not a holiday, just a regular Tuesday. I would wake up earlier. I would say thank you for the coffee. I would take the walk. I would reach for his hand first. Not to apologize with speeches. Words are easy. I would change the small moment. That is what I want you to understand. Love is rarely lost in one explosion. It is lost in inches, in postponed kindness, in conversations we delay because we assume there will be time. If the person you love is still in the next room, do not wait until they earn your softness. Do not wait until you feel completely safe. Do not wait for a perfect apology or a perfect season. Lower one brick today. Say one honest sentence you have been holding back. Let them see that you still care. If you have been keeping score, close the book. Not because the past did not matter, but because carrying it forever will cost you the future. If they are trying, notice it. If they have grown, allow it. People are not frozen in their worst years unless we insist on keeping them there. And if you are the one who has been distant, like I was, do not let pride keep you stuck. Strength is not about needing nothing. Real strength is the courage to be open again. I cannot change what I did. I cannot walk through that door in Ghana beside him. I cannot answer when he said he was still here and wanted to come back in. But you can answer differently in your own life. That is why I am telling this story. Not for sympathy, not to rewrite history, but because if even one person hears this and chooses to sit closer on the couch tonight, chooses to say I love you without being asked, chooses to forgive instead of withdraw, then maybe my regret will not be wasted. Time feels long when you are in the middle of it, until suddenly it is not. Do not assume you have more of it than you do. If love is still knocking at your door, open it while you can.